All right, everyone, it is 10 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get us started this morning. Good morning. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's Office Manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Beginner's Guide to Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records, and today's presenter, Dr. Karen Snow. Dr. Karen Snow is an Associate Professor and PhD Program Director in the School of Information Studies at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She previously worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and the Technical Service Departments at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Please welcome Dr. Karen Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning.
All right, thank you so much, Taylor. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. So, Kathy, are you able to hear us now? I want to make sure everyone can hear us speaking. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, because there's some questions there about whether or not to hear. So, okay, let's get started. So, thank you, Taylor, again. This is me. So, those who attended the last webinar, I introduced myself with this slide, and here it is again. If you'd like to contact me, mckayesnow@dom.edu if you have any questions after this webinar ends. And yeah, as Taylor was saying, I teach, pardon me, primarily cataloging and metadata courses at Dominican University, which is just right outside of Chicago in Illinois. So I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. All right, so FRBR. Okay, so here are learning outcomes, just so you know the basics of what we'll be talking about today. Just understanding the relationship between RDA and FRBR. I kind of hinted at this during the last webinar, so let's make that clear today. Recognize the entities that are part of the FRBR model. Identify the FRBR Group 1 entities and how they relate to each other. And then finally, describe the attributes of resources associated with the FRBR Group 1 entities. So we will not be going into a lot of detail on the FRBR model just because we don't have that much time today, but I will be concentrating primarily on what are called the Group 1 entities in FRBR so that you have a good, solid understanding of those by the end of our time here today. So as always, I do encourage questions and just asking me to stop and to talk about something that's maybe not very clear to you. I'm happy to do that as long as it doesn't get us too far off track. But please, I like for this to be more interactive as opposed to just me talking at you this whole time. So use the chat feature to type, please, if you do have something that you'd like to say or to ask. Okay, so I will be monitoring that. Okay, so if you were at or listened to the recording of the last webinar on library cataloging standards, you may recognize this slide where I talked about how resource description and access, why that was developed by the creators of RDA, the purpose of that, and also I mentioned that what they wanted to do, what they wanted to accomplish with this new standard as they move from AACR2, the Anglo-American Cataloging Rules, second edition, to this resource description and access descriptive standard. They wanted to incorporate this model, FRBR, which is actually not that new, as you'll see, but they still felt it was important to include this conceptual model to provide a framework so to think about relating information entities. So let's talk FRBR. Okay, so that is functional requirements for bibliographic records. But we'll just say FRBR because it's easier, figure that way. And so let's talk about what that is. So what is FRBR and why is it important? Okay, so let's start about what it is first. Okay, so first of all, it's an entity relationship model developed by the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA for short, during the 1990s, and it's based in turn on Peter Chen's 1976 database model. So this is not something that, like I said, it's super new. It's been around for a while, but IFLA took this idea of this database model in order to build a intellectual framework that describes things, whether that's resources, people, subjects, in the bibliographic universe. Okay, so this is not a specific cataloging code like AACR2 or RDA. I mean, it doesn't tell you how to catalog something. That's not really the purpose of it. It's like I said, it's to provide that intellectual framework so that we can have a better understanding of kind of what we're talking about and how those things relate to one another. Okay, if that makes sense. So I know that's very abstract, but it does help kind of frame our thinking about things, right, that we deal with, either actual things or people, etc. And like I said, it's the underlying conceptual model for the cataloging standard resource description and access that we talked about during the last webinar. I will say that FRBR is not the only conceptual model that that's in RDA. It incorporates to varying extents the companion models that IFLA created as well at different times. One called FRAD, the functional requirements for authority data, and another called FRSAD, functional requirements for subject authority data. And but like I said, FRBR is kind of the primary standard model that's used in RDA. Recently, so like a couple of years ago, IFLA decided to combine these three models into one unified model called the Library Reference Model, or LRM for short. So this is available. You can look at it. In fact, I have a slide on this a little bit later on, so we can look at what this is and how it compares to FRBR. But it's not something I think you really need to know a lot about at this point for cataloging purposes. But I'll just tell you that the people, so the RDA steering committee, who's creating a new version, new edition of RDA, that in theory will be out at the end of this year in December. So I'll believe it when I see it. It will incorporate the library reference model. So it is something that we will explore more later. But for now, understanding the basics of FRBR is going to be fine, because we'll see that there is quite a bit of FRBR in the LRM. Okay, so understanding FRBR is going to help a lot in learning more about the LRM. So I'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay, but first, let's talk about FRBR as an entity relationship model. What does that mean, entity relationship model? So first of all, entities. That's a big part of the entity relationship model that is FRBR. An entity is defined as something that can be distinctly identified, and that can be really anything that we can describe. So a person, a concept, a work, etc. Any of those can be an entity in this model. All the entities will usually have a relationship of some sort to one another. So a relationship is defined as an association between two or more entities. So a person, for example, creates a work. A work is about a concept. Okay, so any sort of relationship, right? So those are just examples. And then finally, each of these entities, as well as relationships, have characteristics that may identify instances of them, entities or relationships, okay, so that we can talk about them, yeah? So for example, a person has a name. A work has a title. So name and title are attributes here, okay? Let me just talk a little bit about the different entities first, and then I'm going to show you an example to help illustrate this, because I know this is kind of vague and abstract at this point. So I'll get some concrete examples here. But first, let me explain the different entities. Entities are, like I said, very important, a part of FRBR, so it's important to know what they are, okay, so we can talk about them. So first of all, there are three groups of entities in FRBR. There's group one, which contains just descriptions of resources. So works, expressions, manifestations, and items. Okay, this tells us about a resource. Group two are our agents, okay, people, corporate bodies, families that are associated with the resource in some way. So this can be someone, like I said, who wrote a work, or a corporate body such as a publisher that's published a work, etc. Okay, so just any sort of, like I said, person, corporate body, or family that's associated with a resource in some way. And then finally, in group 3, these are our subjects. Okay, so that can be concepts, objects, events, places, as well as the group 1 and 2 entities. Okay, these describe the subject matter of a resource. So you can have a work that's about a certain concept or about a certain place, or event. You can also have a resource that's about another work, right? So a book that's about another book, a book that's about a person, like a biography. So that's why the group 1 and 2 entities are included here. Okay, so let's illustrate this, shall we? Okay, so first of all, let's start with one entity, the person entity, which, remember, that's part of group 2, right? Of the 3 groups, people are agents in group 2. And this is an entity, J.K. Rowling. So we have attributes of this person entity, like name, like a preferred name, J.K. Rowling, birth date, occupation, etc. Right? So just, it's a way for us to describe the person so we know and can uniquely identify who we're talking about. Okay. All right. So she's a person entity. Now, this person entity has created a work entity, right? So works are in group 1. So we have here like a little arrow pointing to, in this case, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, this work, which, for those of y'all who are Potterheads, that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is the UK title of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which is the first book in the Harry Potter series. So she created that. Attributes of works include titles, form, so the form of the work, such as, is it a novel, is it a song, is it a play, etc., and a creator. Generally, the works have creators. So those are all attributes of this work entity. And once again, this is a reciprocal relationship. This person entity created this work entity, and this work entity was created by this person entity. Okay. And then to kind of bring in all of the groups, here I have a concept entity from group 3. Remember, those are our subjects. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, this group 1 work entity, has a subject of magic. Okay, so attributes of group 3 entities for concept, that would be like a term, like a label in essence that we can use to describe that particular concept. And once again, we have a reciprocal relationship. So Harry Potter and this Philosopher's Stone has a subject, magic, and magic is the subject of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Okay, and these are just 3 examples, right, from these different entities that we find in the Ferber verse, if you will. Okay, so everybody's still with me? Have I completely lost everyone? I want to make sure you guys are doing okay here, and that I have not completely put you to sleep either. So you're still here. Good. I'm glad. Okay. All right. Okay. I always just wanted to make sure I always do this with my students as well, just to kind of keep them on their toes, to make sure that they're paying attention as well. Okay. Yay. Okay. All right. So, okay. So Kamara, let me go back really quick. So, right. So you could. So Kamara, that could be, genre could be an attribute of group 3 as well. So, yes. The short answer is yes. Yes. Okay. Good question. Okay. So in discussing Ferber, right? So I just told the nuts and bolts, right, of Ferber. And then what is the point of this? Because you may or may not be asking yourself, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Is what's the purpose of this, right? This information, right? So Kamara mentioned genre. We already include genre information. We already include title and author information in our catalogs currently, right? We already do this. So what is the point? We've been doing this for over 100 years, right? So we've already been including this information in the catalog for a very long time. So what's really the point of adding this additional layer, essentially this abstract layer this framework on something that we seem to be already doing. So the creators of FRBR, so IFLA, as to say here, they really wanted to provide a clearly defined, structured framework for relating the data that are recorded in bibliographic data to the needs of users of those records. So first of all, we need to make sure that what we're doing is actually something the users need and want. But also we want to, like, the key word here I think is structured. Okay, so structured, well, it's phrase, structured framework, which is not something that we've really done very well in cataloging in the past, because even though we have this information, it may not always be presented in a way that our users can best understand it. Okay, so let me give you an example. So back when I was still working at University of North Texas, just north of Dallas, I was teaching an advanced cataloging class where I had my students catalog a DVD of Taming of the Shrew. Okay, so that's based on the Shakespeare, the William Shakespeare's play, Taming of the Shrew. Is the one with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. If you're familiar with that, if you're not, then don't worry about it. But anyway, so I was looking that up in the library's catalog, my library's catalog, and when I just did a title search for Taming of the Shrew, this result list had, like, in the first result, 10 things I hate about you. Okay, does anyone know why I would get the results for searching for Taming of the Shrew and receive 10 things I hate about you? Okay, and some of you who are fans of 90s rom-coms probably know this, yeah. Right, so as you said, right, so those familiar with it, so 10 Things I Hate About You is a 1990s film, right, that it's like a teen rom-com that is, yeah, loosely based, I would say, loosely based on the Shakespeare play Taming of the Shrew. Okay, so knowing that, I'm like, oh, okay, because I like that movie, right? I'm like, okay, yeah, I can understand why that's coming up. But someone who is not familiar with that film may be like, okay, why am I getting this result? And then once I clicked through to the record, right? So that was just the result list, right? So once I clicked through and looked at the record, the cataloger had done their due diligence and put in the record that it's an adaptation of Taming of the Shrew. It had what's called a name title access point. That's how I got it, as a search results in the beginning. So I mean, once I got there, once I kind of read through, which are we going to assume our patrons are going to go do the same thing? We don't know that. That I understood. But FRBR, in theory, is supposed to make that discovery a little bit more obvious. Okay, that's really the idea, is to really create this structured framework so that our entities, right, all these works and people, etc., that those connections, those relationships are made more clear and understandable to our users. Okay, that's one of the main goals of FRBR, is to really make our catalog more functional and user-friendly. Okay, so if we want to think of it that way, why we're going through this exercise of, that sometimes makes your mind hurt, that's why. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind as we're doing this. Okay, all right. So also, in addition to providing these entities and relationships, FRBR also provides what are called user tasks. Okay, so user tasks are important because IFLA felt that we need to make sure that we're creating metadata that will always allow a patron to do these things. So find, identify, select, and then obtain or acquire the resource that they want. Okay, so first of all, we need to, our metadata should allow users to find, so discover if something exists to begin with. Okay, so if our catalogs don't allow our users to do that, then that's a problem. Okay, they need to be able to identify something, so determine if something is what the user wants. So if they're looking for like a particular edition of the book, okay, then that should be clear in our metadata. They need to be able to select easily the information entity, the resource that they want based upon their needs. So if they're looking for a particular book in a particular edition in a particular language, right, they need a Spanish language version of a book, then that should be accomplished easily using our catalogs. and then eventually obtain or acquire. Or if they can't, that should also be clear as well if they can't do that. But otherwise, there should be information about how they should be able to find it, either on the shelf physically or using a link, right, to find an electronic resource. So getting back to the entities, what I'm going to do for the rest of our time here is really focus on the group 1 entities. Like I said, we could spend a whole day talking about FRBR, so I really want to just highlight the areas that I find that my students as well as others tend to find more confusing than other aspects. Okay, so I want to just focus, and that's the group 1 entities. Okay, so those are the ones I want to focus on, and for the rest of our time here. Okay, all right. So the group 1 entities, just to remind you, the first one being work. Okay, this is a distinct intellectual or artistic creation. It's the definition. So think of it just in terms of just the abstract idea of like a story, or a poem or a song. Okay, that's not actually on paper or recorded in some way yet. Okay, so it's just like an idea or abstract idea. Okay, now that work, usually, but not always, because we can think up all sorts of stories without actually realizing them. But if they are realized, that would be an expression. So an intellectual or artistic realization of a work. So you can take, let's just use the Hamlet, okay, as an example, a play. That play, Hamlet, can be performed, right? That play, Hamlet, can be written down as text. Okay, those are two different expressions of the work, Hamlet. Now, moving from the more abstract realm into the more concrete physical realm is the manifestation, which is the physical embodiment of an expression of a work. So that's taking that performance of Hamlet and recording it. So it's on DVD, for example, so we can watch that later on. That taking that text, right, that was written down in a certain language and publishing that here in the particular edition. Okay, so that's the physical embodiment. So now we can actually like point to something that a library would collect, right? Because we could have a performance, for example, that's never recorded, right? And we in the library world don't care as much about that because that's not something that we actually collect. Yeah, we just collect the things that are actually recorded. Yeah. Okay, and then finally the item, which is a single exemplar of a manifestation, so a copy, right? So taking that publication of Hamlet, for just as one example, and what actually you're holding in your hand, okay, the physical thing that's holding in your hand, on the shelf, etc. Okay, that we can actually point to, right? So I call these, and many people call these WEMI for short, so you can remember what they are. And they are, like I said, in this kind of hierarchical order, but I don't want you all to think that these are, separate things, okay? They all, like an item, for example, has, we can describe that in terms of, yes, like item attributes, but also within an item, there's also manifestation attributes, expression, work, right? That one copy of Hamlet, a paperback that you're holding in your hand, that's also encompasses all these other entities as well. Okay, these are not separate things. Okay, all right. Okay, so, and here's just for those who like to have a more kind of graphic visual display of what this looks like. This is just, a way to kind of envision the work and expression as kind of the intellectual or artistic content above that kind of squiggly red line, and then the physical recording of the content at the manifestation and item level, okay, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, so let's go through an example. I'm hoping this will help. Once again, I like examples because they kind of help kind of make it seem more real as opposed to abstract. So let's just say that we have this work, El Ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, I mangled that, I'm sure, by Miguel de Cervantes in 1605. Okay, so at the work level here, we could have attributes such as like title and a creator, and like I said, the form of the work and maybe the date it was created. Sometimes we know that information, sometimes we don't. Yeah. But let's just say, we know that this was originally conceived and published in 1605. Right? So that's our work, right? So the work then depending on the work, may just have one expression of that, but sometimes there's more than that, right? So especially works like this is Don Quixote, right? Expressed in many different ways over the years, right? So, and these are just a few, okay? So one expression of this work is the original text in Spanish by Cervantes. It was also then translated, the text was translated into English by Charles Durand in 1742, as well as and also translated into English by this J.M. Cohen in 1950. And I'm sure there's many, many, many more. Okay, these are just a few examples of how this one work has been expressed in these different ways. Okay, so like I said, in this case, text, as well as different languages, right? So English and Spanish. Now, let's just focus in on one of these expressions, because each of these expressions will then kind of spawn, usually, not always, but usually spawn manifestations as well, the kind of physical embodiment. So if we take the J.M. Cohen translation into English, then we could say that it's been manifested. You know, first of all, he presumably in 1950 used his typewriter to type out a manuscript, right? So an English language manuscript, that would be one manifestation of it. And another manifestation could be, the Penguin, the actual Penguin publication of his translation, but titled, right, The Adventures of Don Quixote. So even though our work title is in Spanish, it's a different title. At the manifestation level, the English translation has a slightly different title. Okay, so once again, that one work, and then one expression has multiple manifestations. And then finally, that manifestation, let's just take the Penguin publication, may have multiple, many different items associated with it. So for example, we could have, like one library could have a copy on their shelf and have a barcode of like this, what you see in front of them, barcode number there, as well as, there's a copy that's sitting on my bookshelf at home that has a slight damage to the cover. Okay, so each item, right, so that may have its own, attributes associated with that, that help identify that specific copy. Okay, because presumably the Penguin publication of this will all have like the same dimensions, right? It's the same height, has the same ISBN, etc. But the items may have some really different, attributes associated with them. Okay, all right. Okay, so just a few more things here that I want to say about the Group 1 entities, and then we're going to have what I hope will be a fun and interactive activity for us to learn a little bit more about how we can apply WEMI, okay, the Group 1 entities. So first, let's talk about new works, right? So if we have, let's just say we have a paraphrase of Hamlet, okay? So we have Hamlet, the play, and then we have someone who paraphrases it or just completely rewrites it. So like kind of like a kernel of Hamlet is there, but it's not Hamlet anymore. That would be a new work. Okay, so if we take Hamlet and we adapt Hamlet from a play into a novel, that would be an adaptation from one literary form to another. That creates a new work. Okay, that's not Hamlet anymore, it's a new work. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, because sometimes it gets a little interesting trying to determine, okay, what's a new work versus what's a new expression. Okay. New expressions, we really focus in on the expression level, like language, for example. So if you have a translation of Hamlet into Spanish, that would be a new expression. Same thing if we have an abridgment. Okay, so if you have an audiobook, that there's an abridged audiobook, that would not be a new work, it would just be a new expression. Okay, so same thing here for like revisions and updates. And obviously we have to use our judgment in terms of like, okay, how much revision is necessary for something just to remain within the expression level, the same work, new expression, versus like a completely different work. So yeah, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But it's a change in form, but not necessarily physical, is also a new manifestations. We identify those if there's like a change in publisher, for example. So if it's like the same work, same expression, but just a different publisher, then that would just be a new manifestation, a different physical medium. So if you have a paperback book and also an ebook, right? So it's the same work, same expression. Those two would be two different. That'd be two different manifestations. Okay? A different carrier, and also display characteristics. So if you have something that's like a large print version of Hamlet, that will be, once again, same work, same expression, just a different manifestation. Okay. All right, and then finally, new items can be identified by looking at, like, are they damaged, signed, numbered? Is there a different binding, a barcode number, etc.? Okay, that will identify and distinguish new items. Yeah. Okay, so I want to look at this really quick, and then we're going to go into our activity here. So I find this particular graphic that was designed by Barbara Tillett, one of the architects of FRBR, very helpful in when you're trying to, once again, kind of go through that kind of messy process of determining whether something is a new work or just an expression, a new expression of that work. Okay, so if we look at this graphic and move from left to right, okay, so starting with the left-hand side with equivalent, that little box on the left that's called equivalent at the top, this tells us whether or not what we have is just, the same work and same expression. Okay, if it is the same thing, just maybe like a different manifestation, for example. So they have here listed like microform reproduction, copy, exact reproduction, facsimile, and reprint. So let's just say that I have a paperback copy of Hamlet in my hand, okay? And I go to the photocopier and I just make a photocopy of that, right? And hopefully not illegally, whatever. But I make a photocopy of it. Now I'm holding not only like the published paperback in my left hand, but a copy, a photocopy version of it on my right. So I'm not creating a new work there. Yeah, I'm not even creating a new expression. That's just, they're just two different manifestations of the same work and same expression, because the content is not changing. Yeah. So that's fine. So same thing with microform. All of these are what are called equivalent relationships, where we have the same work, same expression. Okay, just a different manifestation. Now, if we move to the right into that kind of the yellow area here, these are all derivative relationships. Some are much more derivative than others. You can see here there's kind of a little gray dotted line, kind of, not exactly centered in the derivative section here. But that's what we call the cataloging rules cutoff point. So once you move to the right of that little gray dotted line in the derivative section, you've moved into new work territory. Okay, but if we stick with what's to the left, this should be the same work, but a new expression. So once again, if we have a translation, right? So I have Hamlet, I have a translation of Hamlet into Spanish, that's still the same work, but a new expression. If we have a new edition, an abridged edition, if it's illustrated, okay, if it's illustrated versus not, yeah. It says here like arrangements and slight modifications, okay? So once again, defining, how revised and how modified a work is, it's a little tricky. For those of you who work with like children's materials, you know that there's quite a few things like, board books and easy readers that have adapted, sometimes quite heavily, some works so that it no longer resembles, right, what the original work is. And we talked about that. For those who were at the session, the webinar last month, and we talked about that a little bit. And I think that, like, I mentioned like the cozy classics, or was it like Pride and Prejudice, cozy classics, right? Where it's just like there's like one word per page, and it's kind of a vague, connection to the actual original story of Pride and Prejudice. Once again, there's a relationship there, right? So there you can certainly say, yeah, there's a connection between the original Pride and Prejudice and this board book, Pride and Prejudice, but it's not the same work. If someone, like a patron at your library, comes in and asks, I need a copy of Pride and Prejudice, and you hand them the board book, the cozy classic, Pride and Prejudice, are they going to be happy with you? Okay, the answer is probably no, or they may be amused. I don't know, depends on the patron, right? So, yeah. Right, so we have to kind of make that distinction as kind of what how much adapting is being done that will then kind of change it into different work. So once again, there's some thought involved, right? This is not kind of like, it's not a science, right? We have to use our judgment. But once we get past that dotted gray line here, if we have something that's adapted to the point where, like the cozy classic, Pride and Prejudice, then yeah, we have a new work. That's fine, right? There's still the connection there. There's a relationship, but it's a new work. If we have something that's a change in genre or a parody, right? A parody of something, that's still a different work. If we have a dramatization, a novelization, a screenplay, these are all new works. They're not simply new expressions of the same work. And then finally, moving into the more descriptive section, that's where if we have like a review of a Hamlet or a criticism of Hamlet, that's not the same thing as Hamlet, right? That's a different work. Okay, now we're describing, right? It's a descriptive relationship, but it's not the same work. So we're definitely into new work territory there. Yeah. Okay. So does that help you kind of make this a little bit more concrete in your mind? So yeah, so right, exactly. So the parody, yeah, speaking of Pride and Prejudice, there's parodies of that. So Pride and Prejudice and zombies, okay, right? So what do you all think? Is that the same work as Pride and Prejudice, or is that a different work, right? Good connections. We're making connections here. That's good. Yeah. So right. So that's okay. So a lot of the same text, but with added zombies. Interesting. Okay. Ooh. So that's tough. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, right. So yeah, so the text is heavily different. Yeah, so okay, so yeah, so once again, we can use our judgment on that, but I think that's a great example of we're in new work territory with that. So, well, right. So Gregory, exactly. So yes, and I want to make that clear that it's not like when we say these are two different works, now they're kind of off somewhere, not connected at all. So going back to my Taming of the Shrew, 10 Things I Hate About You example, I mean, we're already making those connections in the catalog already, but with Ferber, it would be a little bit more clear, like more clearly stated. So yes, we would still make those connections. So we should be, I guess, that's what I should say. We should be making those, because it's an entity relationship model, right? So we're not only identifying these entities clearly, but also clearly identifying the relationships as well. It's a good question. Natalia, yeah. Um, so I'm just reading. These are all like great comments. So, would this be considered the same as something like Sonali Dev's Jane Austen themed series? You've got Pride, Prejudice, and other flavors too. Yikes. I've never heard of that before, so I don't even know how, I don't know if I can answer that. But yeah. Yeah, so I'm thinking, you're probably leaning towards that, yeah, this is like a different work. Especially if there's a substantially different story. But yeah, we do have to use our judgment to determine, how how adapted, how different these stories are. Okay, so but yeah, and so Mary, your point of like having, the different characters, because remember, just because you may have the same characters doesn't mean it's the same exact story. So I think in a lot of these cases, I think it's, yeah, we're talking about new works. Yeah, yeah, and that's fine. I mean, I don't want it to make it sound like having a new work is a bad thing. It just, that's very common, as we know, in the bibliographic universe, is to have, take these original works and making adaptations of them. But we just have to make that clear, exactly what we're talking about and what the relationship is. Yeah, so Nicole, I would say yes. I would say that would be a very helpful bit of information to include in making that connection, that relationship clear. Yes. Yes. Okay, so these are all great questions. This is a great discussion, but in interest of time, I want to move on because I know that we're going to want to discuss this. Because for those of you all who may still be like, I don't get it, I bring out, once again, the Ryan Gosling, to kind of calm us down a little bit and tell us, hey, I tell you I love you in a note. Is it an item that's a manifestation of my expression of love for you? It is very confusing, Ryan. I agree. It is very confusing. So let's kind of keep walking through this. Like I said, I love examples, so let's keep working through some examples so that this will become perhaps a little bit more clear in our minds about the group 1 entities and how they relate to each other. So, okay. All right. So this is what I want us to do. Over the next several slides, I will present different versions of the first Harry Potter story in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. So for those who are not as familiar with Harry Potter or just don't like it, I'm sorry. I mean, you don't need to know. You don't have to have read the Harry Potter books to be able to do this. So just kind of bear with me on this one. But yeah, I'll give you enough information so that we can WEMI these. Okay, so we're going to work together to determine the work, expression, and manifestation information for each of the items that I provide. Assume that you have each item in your hand. So you just let's pretend that we're at your respective libraries and you're holding each of these books, or there's more than just books. There's a book and then the film in your hand. Okay, so pretend that you have the item in your hand. Okay, and the item is pristine and wonderful. It has your lovely library barcode on it. That's your item. Okay, so what I want you to do is go to this link so that you can have here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this into the chat area as well, so that you can just, if you can, if you can't do this, don't worry about it. I'm going to give you the information on the slide, but this is just kind of a helpful, thing so that you can refer to as we're going along. Okay, so here, if you just kind of, go out, this will take you out to a new browser window and have that. Okay, awesome. So that you have the information there readily available. Okay, but once again, if you can't do this, that's also fine. Okay, so just do the best you can. So I'm just going to give you all just like a few seconds to do that. This. And Ricky, thank you for saying that it works. I'm glad that it's working. Yay! I like it when things work. That's awesome. Okay. So we're going to go through, for those who are in the Google Doc, you'll see that I have, each item here, like 5. There's 5 of them, and not everything, right? So this doesn't include everything, all the information about each of these, but enough for us to go through this exercise, okay, in a timely fashion. Okay, so I'm going to start. If you still are working on getting this up, don't worry. I'll just kind of start off slow. Okay, so let's start with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Once again, this is the first story in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. It's a novel. This is how it is titled in the UK. Okay, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This is published in 1997 by Bloomsbury, which is based in London, England. And this, once again, imagine in your mind that you're holding a paperback that's written, the text is in English. Okay, all right. Now, what is the work? What is the work information that we can point to based upon what I've given you? Okay, let's just focus on the information that's on the slide in that Google Doc. What can we say is the work? Okay, so we have some different answers here. So like paperback, the book expression, the text. Ricky's saying Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the novel. Okay, so different answers here. That's fine. We can talk about it. Okay, so if we just stick with the work level, okay, these are all great answers. These are all great answers. Okay, so we also have title. So attributes of work tend to be like title, author, form, etc. So I would say, I'm going to say, these are all great answers, but the work in this scenario is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a novel by J.K. Rowling. Okay, because remember, at this level, the work level, we're still kind of in a more abstract realm. We're not at like the point where we can say this is like a paperback or it's, language or anything like that. Okay, so the work would just be, in this case, in describing the work, like what is the title? Okay, what form is this? Is it a novel or a song or whatever, right? And then who created it? In this case, J.K. Rowling. Okay, does that make sense? The work level, that's the main bit of information that we can point to. Okay, so with that said, how is this then expressed? Okay, once again, you have to imagine this in your mind. You're holding this in your hand. How is that? We're still at the abstract level here. So how is this expressed? Oh, Ricky, you're awesome. You're so good. Okay. So, because this is tough. I find that expression is the hardest for me. It was definitely the hardest for me to grasp. But yeah, it's exactly right. But I'm going to add one thing. Okay, so this is the author's original text in English. So once again, we're not at the like manifestation level yet, where we can actually have something that we can point to quite yet. In terms of the publication information, it's text. So we can have text that is then kind of published as like a print book or an ebook, etc. That would be a little different. But I'm adding author's original text here just because, well, that's going to be important a little bit later. Okay, so, but then some of you already kind of have some of the manifestation attributes down. But how then is this one expression manifested physically? Okay, a lot of you all have this. Yeah, so let's, good, right. So information that I have in the Google Doc and on the previous slide is 1997 publication by Bloomsbury, and it's a paperback as opposed to like a hardback. So Nadine, you're asking, is it redundant to say text in English and paperback in English? It is not, because, and thank you for asking that, because a text, you can have text that's not in a paperback, right? You can have a text that's published as an ebook, right? Because that's not paperback, that's digital. So we have to kind of make that clear. That's why like paperback in this case really needs to be at the manifestation level. And like language though is the same, right? In those cases, ebook versus paperback, they're still the same. Okay, I meant, oh, it's just the English. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, so the English actually, that's the expression. Okay, so you don't really need to have English. It would be redundant to include English at the manifestation level. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay. All right. Right, so Mary, yes, so anything regarding like the cover art, like how the publisher chooses to publish it, that would be more manifestation. Now, as we'll see, Mary, illustrations though that are inside the book, that's a different story, as we'll see. Okay. And Nicole, so at this level, not yet. We're going to get there though. Okay. So in fact, in the interest of time here, I'm going to move forward. Okay. Because I want you to hold that thought. And let's look at the German language version. Okay. So this is Harry Potter und der Stein der Weisen, Joanne K. Rowling, paperback in German, translated by the most German sounding person, Klaus Fritz. This is real. Decided by Klaus Fritz. Published in 2000 by Carlsen, Hamburg, Germany. And yeah, so Once again, this is information on the Google document as well that you can see. So what is the work? What can we say is the work here? Is it the same as in the previous slide, or is this a different work? Ricky indeed. Oh, very nice. Okay. Now, okay, I'm getting your brain juices going here. All right, good. Right, so yeah, the work in this case is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, a novel by J.K. Rowling. Yeah, exactly. So assuming that Klaus Fritz didn't go and translate this in a radically different way, that presumably this is the same story, that what he did is he just took J.K. Rowling's original story and translated it into German. This is what we call the preferred title of this work, okay? And preferred titles is just not a new concept, this idea of having a preferred title of the work. You guys have probably seen this before. It's under the Anglo-American cataloging rules, okay, the AACR2, they were called uniform titles, okay? So we would use uniform titles or preferred titles of works to ensure that if we have something that's been published over time under different titles like Hamlet, or if we have works that have been published in multiple languages over time, we have this preferred title that we can use to find this work regardless of the manifestation title or the different languages, okay? So you just kind of have to know that. So we would have, and I'll show you what this looks like. I thought I had this on the next slide, but I'll show you what this looks like in the record, okay, just in just 1 second. So, but yeah, sometimes you may have to do some research to know, okay? And but what about the expression? So some of you have already mentioned the expression information. So let's remind ourselves, how is this expressed that's different from the previous one, the original Philosopher's Stone? Right, German. Yeah, that's it. It's in a different language. It's right, Viva, exactly. It's still text, okay? It's German language translation by Klaus Fritz of the original English text. Very good. That's it. And then our manifestation information, remember, that's our publication information. And just to kind of move things along, I'm just going to show you the 2000 paperback publication by Carlson, but now we have a different title. Remember, I told you all about this back when we were looking at Don Quixote, how in this case we have on the actual item itself, on the actual publication, the German language title as opposed to the English language title, okay? And once again, this is something that we can very easily accommodate in the record. So once again, going back to our machine readable cataloging standard that we talked about in the last webinar, what we would do is we would have two separate fields in the record, one containing what's on the actual manifestation, okay, the publication, that 245 field, and then in what's called the 240 field for our preferred title or uniform title, we would have the original title, and then we would use like this delimiter, this subfield for the language, German, at the end to make it clear this is the German language translation of this work, okay? You've probably seen this before in catalogs previously, but just that's kind of what's going on there. So with that, okay? So we already have this, right? We already have this way of kind of accommodating these two different bits of information that can be found, right? So this way our users can find this work regardless of how they type in the title, like whatever title they use. Okay, doing a title search. Because these are both access points, title access points. So I don't know if I quite understand your question, Rick. So the title is truly a manifestation. The German title is the manifestation title. A label, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. So this way, once again, this way we can search for either one of these titles and still find this. Yeah. That's a great question. So the original work can have a previous title that was not published. I'm sure that that's probably happened before, Ricky. That's not something, I don't know. I would have to think about that. I'm sure that that's probably happened, but that's usually not the case. At least in kind of the library world, we tend to really just focus on what's been published. Obviously there have been things, obviously, that we work with that are not published, but yeah, yeah, yeah. Getting deep here. We're getting deep. All right. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so once in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on here because now this is our American version. Okay, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, a novel by J.K. Rowling, but this time illustrated by Mary Grandpere, paperback in English. Whoops, I added a 9 here. Sorry, published in 19,999, just 1999. You know what I mean, people. 1999, and Scholastic. Okay, all right. Oh, all right. What's the work? Ooh, okay, yeah, so this one's tough, right? So, because presumably, okay, once again, presumably this is the same story, right? That maybe there's some differences in like the spelling of words, maybe some different words being used, like, sweater versus jumper or something like that, right? So, yeah, but I'm going with you all who said Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone because this is the same story, right? I mean, we can sit there and compare them side by side, but this is the same story. And yeah, Mary, I like where you're going with that, right? So just like if you want to think of this in terms of like, and maybe this is like almost like a different translation, almost, if you want to think of it that way. But I would not go so far. Well, it is a derivative work to a certain extent, just because you could argue that, well, first of all, it may be some slight variation in language, but also that as Nadine is saying, there's illustrations. Yeah. And that, if we look back at the family of works illustration I showed you all before, illustrations are a expression level difference. So here at the expression level, we could say this is the author's original text in English. Hey, it's still in English, right? This is not a different language. It's a different dialect, perhaps. It's revised for American publication and illustrated by Mary Grandpere. That's definitely one difference between the Philosopher's Stone in this case and this one. But Ricky, yeah, if she sells prints the illustrations, that's a little separate. Yeah, I know you're going a little off tangent a little bit there. Yeah, a little bit. Okay. But does this make sense? Why this? It's still the Philosopher's Stone as far as we know. This is not like a completely different work, right? So this is the same work. It's just revised for American publication and illustrated by Mary Grandpere. But just like our German language title, it's titled differently on the actual manifestation, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here because I have that it's like 1 minute until our time's up here. So I'm just going to skip ahead really quick. And if you need to leave, then leave, obviously. I'm going to skip ahead. This is the audiobook, okay? So that you can kind of look at this. The audiobook, as you can imagine, same work, different expression, Okay, so this is an unabridged, spoken aloud version. So that's a different expression than the written form. And then the manifestation, once again, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone as opposed to Philosopher's Stone, etc. Okay, and then the movie. Okay, so this will be the last thing. I'll just kind of stop here and we'll talk about this, and then I'll kind of start shutting it down here. So, but what is the work for the movie? Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone movie, the screenplay by Stephen Kloves. It's in English, 2002, DVD, Warner Brothers Pictures. This is the same work as what we've been talking about with these other ones. Okay, so several of you are saying, no, this is different. Some saying the same. Because I mean, if you think about it, if you're thinking like, and this does happen in the movie industry, but not often, that we're using a screenplay, right, for this movie. Like they're not holding up, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone in their hand, and the actors are not reading directly from the book, right? They're using a screenplay. So, right. So Nicole, I think you're in the right direction. So if we look again at our family of works graphic, you can see here past that like gray dotted line, there's screenplay that's kind of nestled there after like dramatization, novelization, screenplay under the derivative work that makes it a new work. Okay. By the dude. It's by dude. I love that. Hopefully not the dude from like what was it? Sorry, I'm dude, Anyway, so about the dude abides. Okay, so all sorts of great pop culture references here. So screenplay titled Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, written by Stephen Kloves. Right, so this, it's J.K. Rowling didn't write the screenplay; it was Stephen Kloves. And then this is a performance, right? Expressed as a performance of the Kloves screenplay in English. And Mary, yes, we would include the director in the bib record. You're correct. And then the manifestation would be the DVD release in 2002 by Warner Brothers. Okay, so yes. Okay, does that make sense, everyone? Actually, I'm seeing in our chat area that we're reaching the maximum text limit because we've been chatting so much. This is fabulous. I love when I reach the limit. It means that you guys are engaged. It's awesome. Okay, and so Karen, the item is what's in your hand. Okay, so the actual copy that your library has of the DVD. Okay, with like the barcode on it, if it's scratched, right? So what? Because remember, I'm having you all imagine that you have each item like in your hand. Okay, what you're holding is the item. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. This is just once again information about, because you're going to get these slides, okay? You're going to get these slides. This is kind of more information about why we want to use FRBR, because it's really helpful for clearly labeling the various entities and the relationships, okay? So you can read that. And also, once again, kind of my final thought here is that if we look at the RDA toolkit, okay, this is where we have the RDA instructions. I mentioned this in the last webinar. This is our descriptive cataloging standard. The RDA toolkit is where we find the instructions for RDA. For RDA. If you look in the table of contents, do you recognize some of the words that we've just been talking about? Do you recognize, like in section 1, recording attributes of manifestation and item, right? In section 2, recording attributes of work and expression, right? So if you had no idea, like what is going on with that, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to know kind of where you need to go in the RDA for cataloging. Okay, so yes, so there you go. So hopefully now you have a better sense of at least the group 1 entities and what they mean. and why they're important here. And next time, and this is LRM. I can talk about this next time if need be, but you can see here, if you look at this new model, the IFLA LRM that I mentioned before, look in the left-hand side here. Look at the left-hand side. Do you notice anything that we now know a little bit more about? Yeah, do we see a WEMI here? We see a WEMI in the web. This web of stuff here, there is a WEMI. So now I'm hoping you have a better understanding of this, so that when we do kind of get a little bit more into the library reference model, then this will make a bit more sense. Okay, so that's what I have today. Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm happy to stay further. I know that many of you probably need to go, but do you have any questions that you would like to ask or things to talk about? And I'm just going to throw this up here so you guys know that I will be back to to provide further cataloging knowledge goodness to you in the future over the next several months. Join me so we can actually dig into RDA and MARC more fully.
If there are no questions, thank you, Dr. Snow, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on June 4th for Dr. Snow's next webinar, Titles and Tribulations, Explore the Basics of Cataloging Using Titles, RDA, and MARC. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Deb.